pian piano sarà inevitabile. E voi capite che oltretutto mettiamola insieme alla enorme crisi demografica di cui non possiamo dimenticare.
So the Subsidiarity Foundation issued a report on the south of Italy this year, and Giancarlo, expert in demographic issues, said that 50 years from now, we're going to have 5 million people less in the south. So you understand very well that development is a key issue. But let's go back to the 50s. And Italy was falling apart. From 45 to 60, we have become the 7th industrial power in the world. And we were able also to have a successful currency. And how was it possible? Because actually the situation was not that easy from a political point of view. We had two sort of major parties, the Christian Democrats and the Communists. But still, I mean, we were able to sort of have an agreement between and among the members of parliament that allowed us to have such a successful record track. So when it comes to some topics, I think that we really need a sort of background agreement. Yesterday we had a wonderful discussion with Mr. Violante and Mr. Piacentini last evening, and they also said the same thing. We need some common ground. We need to define common areas we can work on together, and parties can work on together. Otherwise, Italy won't be able to compete on the international scenario. And again, going back to 68. 68 is being so much talked today, but what has remained from that period? Well, not just sort of some specific ideas, but actually our topic of this year, the meeting, is really about the fact that we need a desire, a wish to develop, to progress. Otherwise, we really risk to jeopardize the development of our country. So we need to support the whole country development, and each party, each political party can make their contribution. That's why we hope that this working group on subsidiarity will start working again. And when it comes to companies and businesses, we have a large area devoted to the so-called mesh area. And this is an area that is managed by young people. Again, young people are willing to work, to act, and they cannot just rely on sorts of old people. We cannot ask them to go away. That would be crazy. They have to work. It's their right. Okay, we have gaps, but still we have so many assets. And Piacentini and Violante said it clearly last night. We have so many assets. And I mean, also the recent tragedy showed us that in spite of everything, Italy has top engineers. I have in front of me the head of the Polytechnical School. Again, we have the potential, we have big assets. And then the South. What can we do about the South? Because, I mean, we could try to offer new maritime routes to create freight hubs to develop the logistics sector. And also we could consider the South as a hotbed for farming, for instance, for wine production or for alternative energy sources. So, for instance, in the past we had Nero d'Alcamo, a red wine, which was well known at the international level. And then we have tourism, because we have nature, we have art, we have beautiful beautiful sea, we have a lot of culture, we have a great food and cuisine. So the South is so rich. There are so many assets. So we would really like to sort of enhance our South, let it become again the center of Europe. So we should also try to cooperate for that with other Mediterranean countries. And again, I have next to me Mariastella Gelmini, who was a former Minister of Education, and then there is Mr. Bussetti, who was also a major member of our political scenario. And again, then we have a great human capital. The US buy a lot of semi-finished products from all over the world, and then they sort of use them, and so they do the same with our human resources. Sometimes they get our best brains and then make use of them in their own economy. And then when it comes to the welfare state, we absolutely need private-public partnerships today, because resources are lacking more and more. There are shortages, and so we need to go with that. We have hosted Solomon, a great expert in the economic sector, that told us again that we need partnerships between regions, states, and bigger and smaller entities at all levels. So we do not need to reinvent the wheel. It's not a science fiction. We should simply try to refocus key areas, and the working group should do so. We should define common grounds. And for instance, the working group came up with the idea of making every taxpayer devote its sort of 5 by 1,000 share of their tax reports for charities and major initiatives. And again, it's about finding an agreement. It's not about sort of trying to do unclear things, not at all. It's about encouraging our political parties of any kind to get together and work together for the sort of future of this country, going beyond the limits, building our future together. This is what we need now more than ever after such a difficult moment. We have Graziano, the president of the deputies of PD party. Then we have Mariastella Gelmini, the president of the Parliamentary group of Forza Italia. Maurizio Lupi is the president of the Parliamentary working group for Subsidiarity. And then we have Massimiliano Romeo, the president of the senators of the LEGA party. And Gabriele Toccafondi, deputy of the Parliamentary mixed group. And so I give the floor to Michele Toccafondi, former Undersecretary of the Ministry of Education. I now give him the floor to start the debate. So thank you very much for your presence. I would like to thank the meeting. We'd like to thank Mr. Vittadini for moderating this conference. So as Vittadini said, we are going through difficult times, but still difficult times also offer a big opportunity. And I would like to tell you why. So we're going through different and difficult times because, as you know, there seems to be a sort of collapse of so many things. And no magic wand seems to be seen. Nobody has miracle solutions. No one seems to be able and capable to fix magically the situation like a superhero. Nobody has superpowers. We do not believe in fairies or wizards. Right, so people working in the political sector and active politicians know far too well that the political sector needs to be rebalanced and recentered. So that's the only way also to better understand what the Pope said in Cesena not long ago. So problems should be seen as an opportunity, as a challenge, and not as an obstacle. But this is possible only if you know very well what is moving you, and if you have a community supporting you, listening to you, motivating you. And so we have this topic that has to do with the development of the sort of middle parts of society, and then there is subsidiarity, and which is another key topic. So politics is also about education, and the subsidiarity working group should also be considered as a sort of educational pathway. Because our society is made so many elements that it is important to listen to each other, to listen to any member of society. That's the only way to make politics grow and develop in the best possible way. And again, we are all passionate about politics. I think that the people who are here share this passion. We all want to improve the reality we live in. Politics is and should be made by people who are moved by the desire to improve what is not working. And this is the main rationale for subsidiarity. This is what subsidiarity is about. So politics is a common asset and as a form of charity, and these ideas that are from time to time expressed by the church. But actually, all these risks to remain just beautiful words and just theoretical if we do not do anything active. So politics as a service and not as something to make use of is a beautiful concept, but you should always go back to the sources of such passion, because we are all moved by a sort of embedded desire to improve things. Again, this is something that we need to think about, something we should think over much more frequently. And the working group on subsidiarity should really repeat this message. Moreover, our community is a community, is not a clan, and primitives got together to establish villages, and they tried to improve building techniques and started building lake dwellings and houses on piles to develop society. So we need to get together and go back to the origins of politics, the original passion that needs to be at the basis of any political action, because we need to sort of reweave this sort of social fabric. And if we consider social cooperatives, schools, banks, social entities, trade unions, so all these entities stemmed from this passion, from this desire to improve people's lives. I mean, these kind of entities have not been theoretically planned by other people. No, they just develop naturally, resulting from this passion for the good of other people. The people who built hospitals did it for charitable purposes, to help other people who were dying. Or think about schools. Schools were born as an institution centuries before the establishment of state. So we should go back to that passion, because that passion is the real driving force making so many things happen. And maybe the Constitution is the sort of supreme form of this ability of man to construct things and to make things evolve. Again, we simply need to reaffirm this passion, because it goes without saying that political parties cannot agree, and this is reasonable. That's the way it should be. But I mean, even opposite political parties should be able to work and exchange ideas and views to build things for the good of, I mean, for the common good, for the development of the country. So if this passion is the engine, then desire is the fuel, because this is something that let us move on in any respect, in any sector, from a personal and professional point of view. We have so few certainties. So I'm really trying to express to you what I consider is now sort of most needed in the political scenario. We need the willingness to improve things, and politicians, or at least those working in the political sector, should rediscover this passion. So the times we're going through are about challenging opportunities. And so we need the willingness to tackle problems, to go on, to move on. And so that's why each one of us should sort of go down from the balcony. And this is a sentence that has been sort of quoted by the Pope recently twice, first in 2015 and then in 2017. And the Pope said to young people, do not look at your life from a balcony, not from the outside. So you should try to be active and join action. And again, in Cesena recently said, do not look over from your balcony. Do not look over politicians waiting for their failures. So again, this sort of leaving the balcony idea is not only referred to those that decided to politically and actively embrace political work and institutions, but this is something that is addressing everybody. We need to be aware of the difficulties we're going through, and also politics is something that can be made by anybody, but each one of us should go back to that passion and rediscover that willingness to do something for the sort of wealth of this country. Again, this is about new challenges that should be taken up by several entities, including this working group on subsidiarity. And let's not forget the educational urgent needs that this country has. And this has to do especially with our youngsters. It's not just about dropouts or bullyism or fight against addictions. It's not just about having a better education, better training. This is not, justice. It's much more than that. It's not just about passing on information, and it's not just about adding hours of specific topics. I mean, young people need adults that should live up to their expectations, to their wishes. And usually they have very high expectations when it comes to their families, institutions, and the state, and the schools, and the teachers. So when it comes to working with young people, we need to take them seriously. Because, I mean, those are such marking years, because young people discover themselves and grow up, have their coming of age in that period of life. They discover their talent, and they will always need, as they've always had, the support and counseling of adults. So when it comes to this educational emergency, this has to do with young people, but first and foremost with adults.
La parola a
Okay, now the floor to Massimiliano Romeo. Good morning. First of all, thank you. Thanks to Maurizio Lupi for his kind invitation. Thanks to the chairperson, Mr. Vittadini. This is my first time here at the Rimini meeting, so I'm quite emotional, I have to say. I've come here, well, actually, I come from Lombardy, like Maurizio Lupi, as well as many other people from Lombardy. And we Lombards are quite pragmatic. This is what helps us stand out from the others. So I start from an assumption. I was willing to approve, to sign the manifesto of the group on subsidiarity. And I did that for a number of reasons, basically because I share a number of the contents of this, and especially because of one specific point, which is very dear to me. That's an aspect that, in my opinion, should be dealt with and faced by everybody, irrespective of their political belonging. If everybody is concerned about the future development of our country, well, then I think that development means making this country of ours efficient. Without efficiency, there's no development. The manifesto contains a number of words. This has recently been published on Corriere della Sera. This actually was published a couple of weeks ago, and this manifesto contains one aspect. The manifesto talks about going beyond the logic of uniformity and centralization, and this in favor of a differentiated form of federalism. Actually, I come from Lombardy. I've made extensive experience in politics in Lombardy, and we of the Northern League are convinced of the fact that this ideology of uniformity, this ideology based on equality, has in fact been something bad for our country. Let me be a little bit clearer about that. In order for perpetual peace to characterize our society. Because of that, we've always considered the good mayors, the good administrators, exactly in the same way as those mayors, those administrators who haven't been good. We've placed virtuous regions on an equal footing with regions that did not administer very well. And equally, similarly, we treated good entrepreneurs like bad entrepreneurs. Whenever it came with funds to be developed, we did that, and we gave this money to any administrator. And actually, I believe that if administrators, if mayors actually behaved well, actually they have to be rewarded. Conversely, if there are administrations in which no surpluses were registered, they shouldn't be rewarded. Following our logic, this hasn't happened. Linear cuts have been imposed, and this actually was the case for regions, for municipalities. They all underwent, all these administrations underwent linear cuts, irrespective of the wealth, irrespective of the GDP that they were created. Actually, we should start making a distinction between those who do well, who administer well, and those who do bad. Of course, it is true that everybody has the same rights, but it is equally true that everybody has the same duties. And I think these are the topics we should all be confronted with. In recent years, too many municipalities and too many regions have actually complained about that. They have complained about the fact that they were treated in the same way as regions, as administrations that did poorly. There are regions in which the state is not that present. And there are regions in which the state is really not present at all. And it is here that we should intervene. We should recreate a balance. We should make the difference. Making differences, actually the difference is sometimes an asset. While if you pursue the logic of uniformity, well, actually everybody is treated the same. That's much easier, I know. It's much easier to treat everybody the same following a general principle. This prevents you from discussing with the others. This prevents you from applying sanctions, because it is normal that if you make a mistake, you should apply sanctions. If you, for example, know that the municipality of Catania has about 1.6 million euros debt, well, actually, you should wonder who's going to pay for that. Isn't it right that if you make a mistake, then you ultimately pay for that mistakes? Actually, this logic is not present in Italy. Actually, we have everybody pay. We give money to everybody, and everybody's happy, and we make no differences. But I don't think that's this way you can create efficiency. And talking about local autonomies, and this is an aspect that we've long been talking about. There's actually no need of change in the constitutions. By changing the constitution, actually, we haven't progressed that much, and all those who try to change the constitution haven't achieved so many gains. But we should start from the reform of local administrations, looking the ones which are already granted this status of autonomy from the constitution. There is an article, Article 116, paragraph 3 of the constitution, that provides for that. And if that article is there, well then, if there are regions and administrations who provide these services and can manage these services, it is right for them to be given the money. If they aren't good at managing their territories, they should be deprived of the resources. Efficiency in the administration level should be pursued, and plus we should also highlight those who really do things, who really work. I've also worked as a local administrator, and I've seen that there are aspects in which apparently nobody's competent. For example, when it comes to the transportation of disabled people, who's responsible for that? Is that the regions or is that the provinces? There are certain things that are the responsibility of the province, and then the municipality, and then sometimes also the region. Actually, we should create clarity on this. We should make clarity, because these are aspects that are of the interest of everybody. We should clarify what the responsibilities of the municipalities, of the province, of the regions are, and everybody should take on their own responsibility. If this happens, then probably we might be able of bringing some good results home in this country. This is a topic that we've long been talking about, but we've never managed to progress on this. Actually, I remember that in the years of Senator Cesarino Monti from the Lombard area of Brianza, he worked and struggled a lot on this, and I believe this is true, actually. The issue of responsibility, the issue of accountability. Although when it comes to accounts, I'm really interested in looking, actually, what accounts are the responsibility of whom, and who's to be made accountable for certain accounts, who's responsible for certain accounts. I fear that nobody will actually clearly say that, for example, a given bridge was responsible I don't think we are living in a serious country if we don't know who's accountable, who's to be made accountable for certain things. There are certain executives in the public administration. If they're paid for their work, actually they're paid also for their responsibility. It's too easy simply to say, okay, that's not my competence, that's not my responsibility, because that way, I mean, you are protected, and then who cares if the public works goes ahead and then you don't do any maintenance? No, we shouldn't do like that. If you don't want to take on your responsibility, well, just go and look for another job. If you do a certain job and you're paid a lot for that, you have to take on your full responsibility for that. And when rewards are given, rewards to public administrators and to the executives of public administrators, to officials of the public administration, we should no longer apply the old logic based on which the money and the rewards are given to everybody, to those who've worked and to those who haven't. I don't think this is the right way. And then let's look at objectives. Everybody is achieving objectives. In other countries, actually, far away, distant objectives are set. And then if you manage to succeed to reach that objective, well, fine, then you can get a reward for that. Maybe because you have reached that objective. Let's make an example, talking about reducing taxes for enterprises. If a public official reaches an objective, well, it's good, it's fair that actually he gets a reward. But actually, this is not the case in Italy. No challenging objectives are set, no ambitious objectives are set, and then everybody's good at reaching that. I think that once and for all, we should first of all have people who take on their responsibility, that we should implement a true reform of local administrations and avoid this issue of centralization. This is an issue that has to concern everybody. So we should have a new pact on a common good, which in our opinion should start only from this assumption, from this base, from the experience of those who've worked on the field, who know how public administration works, and we should overcome a logic that has not been good over the last few years. Thank you very much. Now the floor goes to Graziano Del Rio. Thank you. Thank you very much to the Rimini meeting. Thanks to Maurizio and to Mr. Vittadini for the opportunity they've given us to discuss this manifesto on subsidiarity together and to talk about a new covenant for the common good. I'm really happy about that. I believe that this country lacks the sense of the national interest, of an interest that concerns families, households, enterprises, the whole society. This is something that is not there. We don't have this sense of national interest and of the fact that in diversity we should first and foremost pursue the common good and the objective of social cohesion. Especially in these days, this is particularly true. And I believe that especially on these days, this appeal takes on significant meaning. Actually, I'm here for the first time after the tragedy that took place in Genoa. I'm here after the funerals, and I think that we should all mourn the victims of this major tragedy. So what do we mean by national interest? It is actually, we mean exactly what President Mattarella said. In other words, this country needs truth and cohesion. This country of ours needs to affirm the fact that the flag belongs to everybody and not to just one political party. Actually, I was born and lived in the city of the Italian flag, and actually every year as a mayor I've celebrated the Italian flag. As Simone Veil said, our country is not something that was stolen to us, but actually we let it escape. So we should first and foremost start feeling united and fighting in favor of the national interest. We then might, of course, have different answers to conquer the national identity. For example, Vittadini was mentioning before, he was talking about the South. And my idea of the South is that the South should be more and more connected. Otherwise, it won't be developed. Maurizio actually worked on a plan for the development. And the very fact that over the last 2 years, visitors have increased by 20%, tourism has grown, is of course a precondition for development. We believe that the high-speed connections have done good to this country. We believe that being connected to Europe is a good way to transport goods on railways rather than on road. That this is part of an overall European model of development. But this is actually my view. What I believe is fundamental is that each and any one of us should understand that the political action has certain limitations. Each and any one of us actually works, trying to work for good. Actually, we put in place an infrastructure plan worth 130 million euros. We increased spending by 80%, but this doesn't necessarily mean that things go well. This country remains frail, remains weak, and here lies the limitations. Here lie the limitations of politics. The political action actually should pursue its work. Politicians have to pursue their work, and they have to work in favor of those who have less. This is something which, in my opinion, is fundamental. And we should mention here the south of Italy, or enterprises, those who are more in need, and it is exactly these subjects that have to be supported the most by politics in order also to become more autonomous. So when I talk about the limitations of politics, well, I fully agree with what Mr. Romeo said. Politics in Rome does not provide a full answer to all the needs of our community. We need to promote the autonomy of municipalities. We need to make them more independent. We need to have a widespread form of development, and we need to make sure that municipalities, in a way, wisely supervise the overall growth of society. When I worked as a mayor, it was actually the local administrations who supported regional or national administrations or warned vis-à-vis certain aspects. So the most beautiful community experience are bottom up, and politics has to have the utmost task to, in a way, respect and be silent towards everything that the community, that society is capable of elaborating. And it should support it. It should reinforce what society, what the community puts in place. So autonomy as a big resource. This is autonomy as a big limitation to central politics. Autonomy to be intended as the ability to risk and not to accept everything that is real. So from this point of view, I believe that the manifesto contains a number of aspects which are, on the one hand, the sense of the limitations of politics. When we talk about more autonomy, actually what we are doing is that we are we declare ourselves willing to give up more power in order to favor these energies from the community, from society. I believe that the most important principle expressed by the manifesto lies in the fact that education plays a central role. Education is fundamental in any policy. So actually any policy is successful or not successful based on education. The other day I happened to meet an association of teachers who support parents to be parents. And there's a great need of that. Sometimes you have these new models, these new patterns of extended families, relations are looser. And I see that youngsters are in a way sort of lost, they feel lost. And so, for example, I see that also in my family. I see the big role played by my wife who perceives these difficulties of my children. So that's fundamental. Through education we can support each other, we can help each other out and overcome the difficulties of life. I have come to recently to a recent age, and I've also had my share of problems. And I'm not someone who, in a way, gets scared too much. But I'm really scared about the fact that in this country, an idea is spreading out that each neighbor is a competitor of yours. This is not just a matter of politics, that's a matter of politics. This is a bad habit because we are no longer seeing ourselves a community. We are a sum of individuals who compete to access resources, and this is really scary. When there was nothing to eat, when, for example, I worked on the ground, actually there were farmers working on the ground all together, and they would then work together on another field. And this is actually what we should do. This is what the manifesto says, that we have to say that it is through cooperation between us and not through competition among us that we can only find the sense of cohesion in society. We need to seed, we need to educate young people to cooperation and not to competition. Of course, everyone has to improve himself. You can even become a saint, and we are in competition with ourselves, but just to improve ourselves and to sow well. But I think that the real resource lies in the fact that we can count on the others. Even if we are enemies, if Giorgetti actually asked me to look after his son because he has to work in government and his son is ill, actually I would look after his son. First of all, because I love children, and also because I hope that he does a good job. I've worked in his place, and I don't want him to fail. So as I was saying, education is everything. Without education, there are no policies, there are no taxpayers, there's no respect, there's no security. Oliver Tambo, the founder of the South African Republic, was based on education. So education was the, in a way, the golden standard, the recipe for all. So I'm firmly convinced of the fact that this is the true emergency. Children dropping out from school is a real emergency. Or the fact that schools are not open in the afternoon, that's what we should work on. And allow me to draw to a close. We certainly need all of this. But in order for this to happen and to continue, well, actually power shouldn't be a threatening power or a seducing power. It should rather be a supportive power. Those who have power, who have the responsibility of holding power, have to, in a way, be able not to threaten, not to seduce, to seduce the others, not to manipulate consensus, but they should rather be capable of helping the community to grow together in consensus. If we manage to do this together, we will work together. We will educate each other, as Socrates said. Actually, Socrates had your same problem of children to educate. There were two generals, and there is this beautiful. So two generals who were too busy in Athens in educating their children. So they said, okay, let's go to Socrates, because Socrates knows everything, he's wise. And then eventually Socrates told them on a very wise note and said, you shouldn't trust me, your children. It is me, it is myself who I'm getting educating together with them. That's real topic. So education, growth only take place together by learning each one from the other with humbleness and patience. Thank you very much.
Mariastella Gelmini now. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me here today, and it's always exciting to come to the meeting, and I always learn so much. I think we have come to the 39th edition. In spite of that, it remains such a wonderful and unique event, so charming, so interesting, and it has become something that really stands out from the crowd. Caron said that the community of communal liberation is a community that today feels a bit helpless and defenseless. So they need to sort of get new bearings. And I think that the fact of having such a conference here with the working group for Subsidiarity is encouraging. And then there are 3,000 young people that work here as voluntary workers and devote their time to this. It's something that should give us hope. So in spite of these terrible mourning days we're going through, the essence of this event was perfectly expressed by our president, Mr. Mattarella, that underscored the ability of the meeting to reinforce the connection between individuals and communities, so far from clashes and prejudice. And I think that this is a very brave and daring message. Certainly, selfishness is there, individualism, and personal freedom is certainly important, but we should never ever forget that my freedom is untouchable, but my freedom ends where the freedom of the other starts. This principle should be the starting point of any political reflection. Considering the complex times we're living in, so many things have changed, and we can do nothing but think over the growth of a political movement like the Five-Star Movement and what happened in Genoa and what happened at the funerals of the victims should make us think. We cannot remain silent and sort of speechless. We need to think about the evolution of our democracy, what happened. We need to think about the future of our democracy. Without such a careful analysis, we will never ever be able to understand our present and lay the foundations of our future. So the core issue today is not the electoral system and how we could and should elect our politicians and sort of major leaders. What is most important is, first of all, to understand the concerns and worries of citizens. And what is defined as populism today probably was much better at listening to that and providing answers. Populism is certainly a major trait of our country, and we cannot get away with it like that. It's too easy. That would be too easy simply to say that populists are racist and that certainly those people are concentrated into suburbs, into inner cities, where there are problems with integration, where integration failed, and where people live in fear. Not at all. And even when it comes to the notion of homeland, we need to go back to basics and redefine our national identity. This is so important. We need to sort of rethink of that. But are we sure that the solution is really sort of closing our borders? Trump's politics is really the solution. Trump's attitude, being closed and trying to be self-centered, is that the real solution? I don't think so, not at all. The ability some political parties seem to have to respond to the lack of trust, rage, mistrust and fear and worries and concerns of citizens may be the key. But I mean, once that understood, we need to find new ways and new solutions. And I'm sure that the working group for subsidiarity will be able to tackle several issues like the development of the South, employment, job markets, and so on and so forth, by finding new ways to establish bridges, to establish connections, because today this world seems to be broken. On the one hand, the sort of the elite, and on the other, all sort of the rest of the population. But this is not like that. And again, this is a black and white vision, and this kind of vision cannot help us find the right answers. And then when it comes to centralizing the power, again, we run serious risks of reviving authoritative governments. And again, we should not forget our history. We should never take democracy and freedom for granted. This is something that needs to be nurtured and cherished and developed. We need to remember that. We need to protect bravely and courageously what we have got so far. That's why I believe in the central role of the parliament. And let's think about the recent tragedy of Genoa. It's not time to be aggressive towards each other and have a sort of clashing attitude. Of course, the responsible need to be sort of identified, and they have to pay for what they did, certainly. And then I totally support what Giancarlo Giorgetti said about designing a major maintenance plan for infrastructure, roads, railways, bridges, school and buildings. And of course, this is necessary. And my party, Forza Italia, wants to set up a specific inquiry commission to fully understand what went wrong when it comes to the maintenance of our infrastructure. Maybe there was something lacking. Maybe something was done wrongly. Maybe we need to fill some gaps, but certainly we need to avoid further casualties. We need to define a monitoring system. We need also to define a sort of ranking systems of our infrastructure and public buildings. The Parliament is in charge of that, but still a sort of common understanding needs first to be defined. In this respect, allocating resources is also crucial, and European Union allocated 44 billion euros for several works, and so far Italy has used just 5% of that amount. So let's try to make use of the resources that are available to us. And going back to Genoa again, there's something that certainly would remain in our heart. and should also help the city sort of restart. It's the solidarity and generosity of the voluntary workers, of the firefighters. They really deserve a big, big and deep and moved round of applause for what they did when they looked for survivors, risking their own lives. 6.5 million voluntary workers in our country, 3,000 of them are here, so people that spend their free time for the others, with the others. So let's start again from that. So let's consider positive competition. Competition can be positive. It's when you try to somehow sort of reduce your enemy in a state of subjugation that is wrong. But this is not the case. We should get over rage and opposition and clashes and prejudice. We need first off not to take for granted the democracy we have and then try to move on. I don't think that likes on Facebook can replace the parliament. I do not think that an algorithm can be used to somehow have an influence on elections. And, well, again, democracy has limits, of course. It has virtues and defects, as anybody else, as anything else. But let's be careful before sort of putting at risk some key foundations of our society. And in the beginning, Mr. Vittadini talked about the educational emergency we're going through and the need to invest in our human capital. I totally agree, because the future of a country relies on its ability to enhance its talents, to develop its society. I think that Cottarelli a few weeks ago wrote a text for La Stampa and talked about the need for politics to guarantee equal opportunities right from the start. That's where we need to go back to, regardless of the sort of social background of any young person. Each young person should have the same possibilities and chances and opportunities. So the so-called social lift as to start again. Anybody should be able to climb the social ladder. Again, we need full educational freedom, and this is absolutely paramount. So schooling equality is key, equality is key, and schooling equality needs to be guaranteed. We need funds for that, and we should never ever consider doing something against that. We want public school, and we want an equal public school, and we have extraordinary models. We come from Lombardy region, and Bussetti also knows that model far too well. And we have vocational training. We have traineeships that are some key elements of it. And then there is the south of Italy, and it needs to be supported. And we have the relaunch of our social society. We really need to sort of do something for the intermediate bodies, the social intermediate bodies, and we cannot do anything but work for that. Otherwise, we are really going to put ourselves in a dangerous situation and position. Of course, the tragedy of Genoa is too recent, and people now, are going back to some sort of nationalist ideas. The public-private partnership is a major value that should never ever sort of be discussed. And again, when it comes to the south of Italy, it's not an even greater welfare state, the answer. It's employment, it's innovation, it's research, what we need to invest in. So we need a shock therapy, and certainly we need more participation in the political life. Too many times politics is seen as something negative. No, I'm talking to those people, to that Italy that, is really passionate about the future of this country, people that do their best for the future of this country. We need a new human project for the 21st century. Our country had a lot to build in the past, but now, as Vittadini said, we need to rekindle the sort of flame of building a better country, and that depends on us. That depends on our ability to work all together. Certainly, the patient is seriously ill. We need a shock therapy. We need to do something urgently, but the sooner we start, the better the patient will get. Thank you.
Parola a Maurizio Lupi.
Now the floor to Maurizio Lupi. I would like to thank the Rimini meeting for hosting the group of the Parliamentary Group on Subsidiarity. As we all live our present times, it was not to be given for granted that this group was actually supposed to be resumed, that its work was supposed to be resumed during this legislature as well. As the Pope often said, we are witnessing a real revolutionary change, so we cannot face new challenges with old tools. Proposing the same formulas is meaningless. It makes no sense. It is as if we were to look at the future with our head looking to the past. And so the group on subsidiarity, which is our challenge, is not looking backwards. It cannot be like that, because politics and reality are so difficult, so tough, that they prevent us from doing this. So I would like to express my thanks to all the dear friends of most parliamentary groups who, also including some individual members of parliament of the Five-Star Movement, who in the current situation are working on this. Actually, the manifesto was drafted before the dramatic event in Genoa. The title of the Rimini meeting was conceived much before last year, much before what actually was about to happen in Italy and in the West. So the very fact that we're telling ourselves that the forces that move history are the same that make men happy, actually mean that those who do politics have the task to look to the future and not to the past. So it takes courage in this legislature as well to resume the works of the group on subsidiarity. And we're saying this loud and clear. This group, with this manifesto, has not drafted a new or an alternative contract of governance, because in democracy those who govern have the task of governing, and actually we are not in a way fighting in order for those who govern to fail, because what's at stake is the common good. And if you are in the opposition, what you do is actually you try and give your contribution to make sure that that common good can be reached in a better way. With this manifesto, we are not proposing an alternative program. What we've tried to do was to try and understand, and this is clearly underlined by the title of this year's meeting, we wanted to point out that actually in this moment we are not politicians. If we start from the assumption that we are politicians, that, well, we haven't understood anything. We are men or women who work in politics, who live in their families, who work as entrepreneurs, who have the desire to work, to do our best in order to help building a community in which individuals, in which persons, people are free, happy, optimistic, and can look to the future. There is an exhibition devoted to the 1968. There is a sentence pronounced by Giorgio, and I was lucky enough to meet him in person. And actually, quoting Giorgio, we need to transform, to change anger into courage. Today there is a lot of anger, legitimate anger, but unless we turn anger into courage, well, then there is no hope. St. Augustine actually explained what courage means. That's the courage of seeing how things can go, while anger lies in seeing how things are going. But the strength of a man, my desire to continue working in politics, continue being a protagonist, lies in the courage, in the diversity that we have to try and be optimistic, to try and contribute building the future of this country together. So the parliamentary group is a small tool towards the attainment of this objective. Actually, I underline that we are men and women committed in politics, because actually, if you are working in politics or in your families, in the works of the meeting, well, actually, the basic assumption is actually what we stated in the manifesto of the group. There's something that we have in common. There are things in which we are profoundly diverse, actually. This is what Mariastella Gelmini said. We cannot simply say that the state is good and the private sector is bad. Actually, history has already failed on that, but that's an aspect on which we will discuss, and we will give a strong contribution to try and show the reasons why the idea that the reason is good versus the private sector is bad doesn't take into account the fact that actually the first task of the state is subsidiarity, and so we should give value to those who are the foundation of the state, that is to say, ourselves. So the basic presupposition is that we, as men and women, is to try and understand the reason why we need to act, and we need to understand what makes us happy and what are the elements that we have in common. So that's why I'm profoundly grateful to the friends who are sitting at this table and to all the deputies who signed the manifesto. This was nothing taken for granted. Many people may wonder what the group has done so far. The results of the group actually pertain to the responsibility of those who govern in democracy. That's how it should go in democracy. And the group is not a venue for results to be given, but rather a context in which we state that unless we recognize what unites us and not what divides us, we are not going to build anything. And this starting from our own role. So we identified a number of commonalities. The first thing is that each and any one of us is not evil, in absolute terms. We actually do our work. We work with our parliamentary groups. We draft proposals. We draft bills, because their task is actually to change, to turn that anger into courage. So let me give you some practical examples. So what will the results of the group be? We did not actually plan the 5,000 percentage. That was common work. We said that there are 4 emergencies, that these emergencies were indicated in the document, and it is worth working on them. So working for the common good and making a covenant on that means that actually what happened in Genoa touched us all. And when a tragedy like that of Genoa happened, actually what you find out is unity. Is solidarity. I mean, solidarity is at stake again. And well before looking for a culprit, looking for a scapegoat, and we all know that responsibilities have to be ascertained, our first and foremost task is to look to the future. President Mattarella said, and Cardinal Bagnasco said that as well, we have the courage to identify what brings us together. So this extraordinary covenant mentioned by Giancarlo Giorgetti for the maintenance of public works in a country is something that brings us together. And this is not a matter of ideology. If this country does not renovate itself, if it does not modernize itself, it takes back to the 1970s, well, these are aspects that concern us all and not just a part of that. So reconstruction, this is something that actually concerns us all, or looking for the culprits, for those who are responsible. Justice is an important element of a manifesto. And justice, what is justice? Who decides what's right and what's wrong? I was very much struck by the fact that democracy in our country has always been based on a true balance between tasks and roles, the legislative power, the judicial power, and the executive power. Who decides who's responsible? Actually, is that the task of the political party well before the responsibilities are ascertained? In other words, these issues testify to the fact that we all have the desire to build something. This brings us together. This can help us turn a legitimate anger into the courage of the future. And this together, each and any one of us, for his or her role and in our diversities. Or the issue of putting the blame always onto the others, or the state, nationalization. Should we go back to nationalization, to the state doing everything, managing transportation or the streets? Has the state been effective on this? Has it been efficient? It took the state many, many years to build the Salerno-Reggio Calabria freeway, and the bridges built by the state collapse exactly in the same way as privately managed bridges. So this is work that we are called upon to do together, starting from what unites us, and then trying to understand how proposals built can be translated, also looking at education and also listening to the others. We parliamentarians have to understand, we need to look at reality and how this can help us. And we need to, in a way, try and identify what solutions can be found. I would like to thank you very much because, as Gabriele Toccafondi said, this is a new beginning. This is a really fascinating challenge. We are all at stake. We're all called upon to, in a way, be at stake. As Gabriele said, many of us, we no longer have a coalition or a party. So, is it to be considered as a fascinating challenge so that we can, in a way, question ourselves again? So thank you very much to Giorgio Vittadini, to the Foundation for Subsidiarity, Giorgio Vittadini and Sandro Bicocchi, because they've declared themselves willing to help us, to support us, to work also scientifically in drafting our reflections. And this support is really fundamental because work is always meaningful only if we, in a way, set ourselves positive objectives. We may be divided, but there are positive signs, as was said by the Corriere della Sera paper. So a bridge without walls, which is our common asset. That is our task, and that is our duty as well. Thank you. Now the floor goes to Giancarlo Giorgetti. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And thank you very much for your invitation. While I was driving here today, I was thinking about what I was about to talk about. I am the only representative of the current government, so I might hold a political speech. I think that there may be even people who are interested in this, but actually I would rather leave this to maybe the answers to possible questions posed by journalists afterwards. I would like rather to, in a way, address the topic that has been put to the table. And in doing so, I hope I can explain what I mean, and then you can then make correlations between what I say and current issues. And I would like to start from the title. So the title of the meeting, the forces that move history are the same that make man happy. And I would like to be provocative on this. I believe the title is wrong. There is a sentence I've already used, that's a quote by Dostoevsky, which I like very much, which states in a famous volume on Karamazov brothers, if you have the people choose between freedom and happiness, the people will always choose happiness. So actually, the title should end like that. The forces that move history are the same that make man free and happy. Otherwise, if there are people accusing me of being a populist, my reply could be, okay, if you want to make people happy, if you want to make men happy, well, being a populist is your solution. But that title, the title of this year's edition of the meeting, gives is a starting point for my considerations. So history is changing, history is moving. Some time ago, there were people who would theorize that history was over. Today, the real foe of democracy, real enemy of democracy and of politics is, in my opinion, the globalist ideology. So globalization that has gained ground over the last 20 years, which in a way wanted to replace democracy. The solutions provided by this ideology in Italy or all over the world were always the same. They were the same when it came to economic policies, for example, the economic proposals provided by the International Monetary Fund or the solutions provided by the European Commission. So those are considered to truths of economic policies which are expected, are supposed to guarantee welfare, well-being and prosperity. And when it comes to values, some theories, there are some theories which want to be, in a way, given, communicated to the people, which are, however, solutions which are politically correct. This kind of overdose of political correctness that has been given to peoples all over the world and not only in Italy. What's taking place in Italy is only epitomizes a global phenomenon. And you can find similarities all over the world, starting from the United States. So what's happening to the Italian public has caused a reactionary policy. So the deep roots, deep traditional roots have not accepted this form of influence. There has been a reaction. There has been a populist reaction, we may say populist, yes, but in this reaction kind of knocked down all the elements, all the milestones of democracy. So the identity reaction to this phenomenon also, so to say, knocked down representative democracy. And I would like to say to Mariastella Gelmini, commenting on the central role of Parliament, well, actually, the truth is that Parliament doesn't count at all because it is no longer felt by electors. They see, they consider Parliament as the place, as the venue in which politics is doing nothing. It is not coming to any solution. So if we continue defending this model of representative democracy, we are not doing democracy any good. As Giorgio Gabriele said, democracy is participation. So today we should ask ourselves if there is participation. My reply to this, my opinion, according to my opinion, there is indeed participation. Actually, I am not a social media person, I have to say, but I can perceive that there is participation. We cannot say that people is not participating. They are participating, are participating a lot. Simply, they add a like or a dislike, and this is what they mean by participation. That's a superficial form of participation, and yet it is there. That's undeniable. And this form of participation is based on a real avalanche of information. There is more information, but there's more information, but also more fake information, more lack of information. In the past, people used to read books. Only few people read books today. But we had to read books to get information. So we had to reflect. We had to go into the details of that content, of those contents. Today we are flooded by information, and that's superficial. And information is very quick. After 3 or 4 days, when the case is over, you have yet a new event, and people start talking about other aspects. And I really hope that this is not the case with the Genoa tragedy. So this short circuit between democracy, politics, participation can be solved and has already been solved by the direct relationship between the people and the leader. So I am not saying that of course you need to have recognized leaders and the people, but this phenomenon has become sort of pathological. Probably because of the web, but before the web, we had TV. So before the web, we had Silvio Berlusconi, who used television to establish this direct relationship. So he showed that it was possible to win without having a true party, a truly organized party behind. Having an organized party behind is a burden. It is a diseconomy in modern politics. Having an organized structure is something that pulls you down. It's much easier to have a direct relationship. And here too, we at the Northern League know very well how useful it was to have an organized party. And we are happy about that because we've managed to have this direct link with the people. So if this is true, if everything that I've said so far is true, well, then we should not neglect an aspect that has not been touched in our political conversation, which is the reform of democratic institutions. Unless we reform democratic institutions to try and give sense and give a direction to this type of popular response, well, then it becomes very quick and easy to throw everything in a bin. So this has become also one of the titles of the contract, government contract. We need to change something in our institutions, and also very rapidly. Everything that happens around, everything that revolves the powers, the buildings of power in Rome is kind of overwhelming us, and that runs the risk of being a true risk for democracy. Now, very briefly, I would like to touch upon an aspect which is maybe more positive. this enthusiasm, this passion, which is supporting governmental action. I know that actually also lots of people, including you, are kind of puzzled vis-a-vis the work that this government is doing. Actually, this kind of passion, this eagerness to change has to, in a way, become positive and make and produce results. We need to be able to change the mechanism within which we work. And in this respect, and I am addressing the group of subsidiarity, I think that all of you know what subsidiarity is. But let's look at reality. I was listening before that Gabriele Toccafondi mentioned a number of institutions. When it comes to intermediate bodies, if we talk about institutional, formal intermediate bodies, maybe the ones that were set up at the beginning of last century, well, it seems to me that they are all undergoing a severe crisis. But if I look at the intermediate bodies that were set up or that were created because of the free association of citizens, well, apparently these are very healthy. Everything that is now immovable is now showing that it is not capable of understanding modernity. So, for example, when it comes to the world of credit, when it comes to bank cooperatives, they have a very beautiful history. They have developed in a very positive way. They contributed to the development of certain areas. But today, that world as is can no longer work. Or, for example, having professional associations be legitimate. Actually, apparently, they do not represent anybody. I do not want to be offensive towards anybody, but I might go on for hours. I mean, when Minister Delrio met trade unions in the 1970s, that had a given role, they have a given place. In the year 2000, yet another, and that same meeting in 2018 has lost value. So the reality is a different reality. It is very thrilling. It's made up of many different situations. There are volunteers association. And I think this is something that we should be proud of in Italy. So here, I think that we should be positive, and we should, in a way, take care of all of these emotions. We should take care of the fact that, competition does not induce us to consider our neighbors as enemies. And then also this appeal to the national interest, to the common good. Well, that's true. That's fair. However, I think there's something deeper that we need to share. Not something that is from the top down, but rather from the bottom up. Unfortunately, we no longer have philosophers. In the past, there used to be many more philosophers. So actually, I think that citing the words of a sociologist might be helpful. So we've seen history progressing always and constantly from community to society. this tendency, this trend has to be reversed, in my opinion. We should come back from society to the community. As this German sociologist said, this was said a couple of, some years ago, and I quote, "So the theory of society concerns an artificial construct. That's a group of individuals who only superficially resemble community, and this to the extent of which in which individuals live peacefully one next to the other. However, while in community, human beings are basically united in spite of the things that divide them. In society, they are basically separated in spite of the many factors that unite them." Thank you very much. Just a couple of final remarks, and I would like to accept in this respect the provocation of Undersecretary Giorgetti. Well, probably he's right if happiness is to be intended as it is intended today, but actually Giussani's sentence, Giussani's quote, doesn't mean that happiness means that you can do whatever you want. Happiness goes hand in hand with wealth, and actually, as Mr. Iannacci said, the heart is urgent. That's the urgency of something that is never enough. That's infinity. So that's some kind of an inconvenient, uncomfortable truth. It is something, to quote Dostoevsky, who was described by Dostoevsky in a volume of his in which actually Jesus meets a person, the inquirer, the inquisitor general, and actually the two talk and say, actually, people want bread. Actually, we bring wealth to the people, and Jesus smiles and goes away. So that's the issue. So the happiness described by the meeting is that it is never enough. So in this I agree with him. It's never enough. And he's right when he says that is an uncomfortable happiness. And that's the thing that we've always done for years. We also made a lot of mistakes, but because we ourselves at the meeting have looked for power. Because power, hegemony, or presence, that's the big issue that Giussani first and Caron after him mentioned. So power means being present. When you are in politics, when you enter politics and you are confronted with that risk, the mistake of any government is always lies in the fact that actually they are there and they're not interested in power. That's not true. Everybody runs this risk. We have to be truthful to ourselves. Once Giussani was asked if one can do big, powerful things, and his answer was, yes, you can do that, but if a tree grows, either the roots are deeply rooted in the ground, or sooner or later the tree will fall down. This doesn't mean that we are puzzled vis-à-vis the government, but we need to know that actually that government has the same risk of the previous governments, that basically they're blaming previous governments. So it's not that we are cynical and waiting for the COP on the river, but yet the COP will always lie. That lies in the limitation. That's job. That's the issue of this meeting, job. So intermediate bodies, I agree with you on that. They are undergoing a crisis. There is also a crisis of ours. And everybody's mentioned this issue, Gelmini, Delrio, Toccafondi, Lupi. We need education. We need an education of intermediate bodies that should not become guilds. They have become, in a way, sort of guilds, and each and any one of us kind of corrodes. When Tremonti came here once, he sort of listed out all the various differences that exist between certain intermediate bodies. So each and any one of them has their own power. Or the president of Acea, Modiano, once told us that he would treat basically trade unions when talking about redundancies, that actually only the redundancies, the redundant jobs of other associations had to be taken care of. So basically intermediate bouts are an element of education for the people, for the common asset, for the common good. Only Caron and Giussani criticized the communion and liberation body. Actually, a leader has to criticize their own group in order to re-establish the common good, in order to remind us always that the other is a resource, is an asset. But this is something, this is a kind of work which is not so transparent. As I like cyclists very much, I always like to say that there are two ways of going up. For example, there are those who run very fast, but the mistake, so the sprinters. So the mistake that you can make is to run after the sprinters. If you're good, you have sprinters go. So sprinters would go, and then you run after, but at your pace, always at your space. And with your team, we've seen that actually there was a great team at the Tour. And actually, eventually, the team would run and win. You go at your own pace, and then eventually you would take the sprinter, because mountain routes are very, very long, like politics, are very long. You may have 40%, and then the year after you are at 6%. No, it's not going to last. So that's the kind of work that we would like to do here, together with the government and the Intergroup. And I would like to add on this that there can be unity in diversity, because subsidiarity is exactly this type of issue. You have lots of pluralistic realities that build a common good. So you have differentiated pluralism that bring unity. Why should Italy be the same in order to be united? We are with our head in Middle Europa, and then with our tail we are among Muslim countries. So we should take everything. So we pretend that all the others do not possess our diversity. We want to have everything, like the heart. We want this diversity. So this is a challenge. We are not puzzled vis-à-vis this government, vis-à-vis exactly like the other governments. We want to collaborate with them. As Vico said on Corriere della Sera, commenting to what Caron said. So this armed, defenseless means that we communicate with everybody, and dialogue is the form of subsidiarity. I'm happy of the fact that we have all the parliamentary groups here. Tomorrow we will also meet the people of Leo. I would also like to meet representatives of the Five-Star Movement, but they haven't accepted, because I believe that this collaboration, in the First Republic, we had the Episcopal Commission in telling Catholics whom to vote for. But this collaboration also means that we are not satisfied with everything. We would like to be critical towards the others and everybody, because this kind of criticism, this having to choose between many information, if you have your own personality, you have lots of data, and then you choose. You ultimately choose. So it's not true that machine learning goes its own way. If you know who you are, you know what data you're looking for. So this critical aspect is the kind of contribution we can give, and we would like to give not against politics, but together with politics. So we're going on in this work of ours.